Welcome to the Masters Alliance, and I am Herb Perez. Today, we are doing part 2 with Coach Juan Moreno. He's going to be speaking about the recent Pan Am qualifiers for the Olympic Games, which will occur shortly in Paris. He is very upfront and very thoughtful about the considerations of the athletes and coaches involved, but more importantly, the state of affairs as we find ourselves in today for Taekwondo in the world, Taekwondo regionally, and most importantly, Taekwondo here in the United States. So relax, take a seat. This is going to be a good one. And again, this is the Masters Alliance. All right, welcome to our podcast again. This is the Masters Alliance, and I'm joined by my good friend and brother who just recently returned from the Pan Am qualifiers, and we wanted to catch up on what he thought and what he saw. I think it's an awesome time to catch up on that. And again, welcome back, Coach Moreno.
Happy to be here. Yeah, just had a great time the last conversation, and with the recent events of the important event for the Olympic Games qualification in the Pan Am region, I thought it'd be awesome to kind of catch up and kind of dive into that a little bit.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to get your first impressions, your fresh impressions from the qualifier itself. Overall, what did you see? What did you think about it?
To be completely honest, I was a little underwhelmed. I've been to a number of these now, and there's always high pressure and there's always great matches. And I think there was definitely pressure, maybe more so for some people, but the level of matches and the quality it just was low. I mean, there was just a handful of really good matches, competitive matches that were kind of in doubt. So overall, I was a little underwhelmed, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Like I said, the pressure of the event, the pressure of the programs, the pressure of the athletes themselves. So it was strange. I had a weird, strange feeling being there. And then when I left, did that just really happen? I usually feel much bigger afterwards. I feel more like, holy cow, I just was part of something that was so special. And it didn't feel like that, to be honest.
Well, that's unfortunate. I know you've been to every Olympic Games. You've been to a ton of qualifiers. I've been to a few with you as well, both as an athlete and as head of team. I know that currently you're working with the Brazilian Olympic team, and I want to congratulate you. First of all, I think you were only one of 2 countries to qualify 4 athletes.
Yes, from this continent, from the PATU, region, the Pan American region, we're one of 2 teams to get a full team, which is 2 males and 2 females. So we were pretty confident going in, to be quite honest with you. We had a 1 number 1 seed and 2 number 2 seeds, but kind of going back to your original question, with the knowledge of knowing who you're going to fight via the Olympic rankings, we had a really great idea of exactly who we were going to fight the first round, a pretty good idea who we'd fight in the qualifying rounds. So we were very prepared for that. So,
well, I think I'm going to get back to the event as a whole, but I didn't want to miss or not underscore the fact that for a country that has different resources than the United States has obviously overwhelming, probably the largest country in the region, financially one of the most vibrant countries, diversity, and then just sheer volume of athletes. For Brazil to be able to compete at that level and achieve that, what do you think the key was to Brazil's previous successes and its current success, and it seems like its upward trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think now, first and foremost, I think our team behind the team. I mean, anytime you have a successful team, they're going to point to the coaches and the strength and conditioning and the nutrition and the Olympic committee. I mean, I think we really have, from our president all the way down, a team. I mean, I'll give you an example. We had 3 athletes there. We had 3 coaches. We had our performance analyst. We had our doctor. We had our physio. And then, just for support, we had our president, vice president, and Olympic committee member. So everybody played a really, really specific job. Each coach had a specific job. The doctor had a specific job. The physio had a specific job. Our performance analysis analyzer had a specific job. So when I look at what it all came down to in this last moment over these 4 years, we were ready. We were prepared. And I think that was extremely different than in generations past from Brazil, because you know as well as I, they've always had a pocket of success or a special athlete here or there. And I can go back into the 80s, 90s, and there's always been one or two athletes that were pretty darn good. But I think as a program right now, we're pretty solid. As a matter of fact, we had to make a very difficult choice of who to bring to this qualifier. And there was some people that were left out that I believe if we would have chosen them, they would have qualified just as well. So that shows the strength and the health of our program as a whole. So I think the organization, everybody playing their role, everybody keeping their egos in check, knowing that their role was literally just as important as the next person's role. I think that's a big factor in the success for Brazil specifically.
And that's what we call in the sport business sustained competitive excellence. And I know you're familiar with that term because you were one of the creators of the USA Taekwondo coaching program. And during that time, there was a large emphasis put on not athletes that were on the bubble, meaning they were going to succeed. They had raised their level to some level. But the idea that we were going to develop grassroots development, move that into national team pipelines, and the more people you put in the grassroots development, they end up in the pipeline. So do you think that Brazil has figured out the sustained competitive excellence and perhaps other countries aren't focused on that?
Well, to answer the question about Brazil specifically, because I have intimate knowledge of that, yes. I mean, we really have our junior staff and our under 21 staff that goes around the countries presenting seminars and training opportunities for those local people that can't travel. They don't have the financial resources, or they're just breaking into it. And those coaches are like searching for talent to kind of feed up the pipeline. So when I talk about, we talk about the Olympics, but we also have different programs throughout the country that are finding those cadets and juniors and, under 21 athletes to help us, to support us, and so we can move forward. So I think we do have a very good systematic approach to have that sustained competitive excellence. I wouldn't have said in the past, Brazil is going to be a country in the future. But right now, we have some people that literally push our Olympians, literally push them, that have beat them in the team trials domestically. So I feel really good about our sustained competitive excellence in the future. Other countries, listen, there's some countries like, I'll get right into it, Mexico. They probably, out of all the countries currently in the Plateau region, they have the most financial support, they have the most public support, they have the most resources. I mean, this country should have 4 Olympians every single time out with their eyes shut. Maybe the United States should have that every single time. And that's been our standard for many, many years over here. Last Olympic go around, we weren't so fortunate. This one, they were. Brazil and the United States both qualified for 4 athletes to the Olympic Games. But, I think we should, at least from the Brazil standpoint, moving forward, we want more than 4 athletes, via the Olympic rankings. So, and I think our pipeline looks extremely, extremely, extremely healthy.
Well, and I think that's good news. I think you said something that is going to lead me to the next question, which is when you spoke about the event in general, you spoke about it being, I don't want to say it wasn't at its usual caliber of competitiveness. And that usually means that there's something going on. And I wonder, there's a couple of possibilities, but is it the idea that the process for qualifying, the amount of tournaments that these people have to compete in throughout the year just to get to a point level where they can compete at all, is that a factor in this? Are there other factors that are creating this?
100%. Listen, as much as the world ranking has helped kind of establish everybody, the downside is there are some countries, they look at the draws because they know it too, and they say, holy cow, I got to fight the number 1 person first and then the number 4 person in the second round. And they almost know that they're going to have to strike gold. They're going to have to get magic to get to the Olympic qualifier. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but maybe in years past, it was a luck of the draw. And maybe there was a chance that one side gets loaded up and they only had to beat one tough person, or they had an easier draw. And I'm not saying that's proper either, but the world rankings have have benefited the big countries. And we on this side of the world, we complain about that in Europe, because in Europe, they can get to, 3 different countries in 45 minutes. I can't get out of Florida, for 10 hours. It's crazy their advantage of how they can get to competitions and cross training, where in this continent, we can't do that. Look, if you're coming from Brazil, Argentina to the United States or to Canada, come on, man, it's 7, 8, 9 hour flight direct. So I think the world rankings and the necessity of traveling to all these events has, in a strange way, diluted people's hope, belief. There's a chance that I can do it. Matter of fact, there's a reason why a lot of the Pan American countries can't even field a full team anymore. Because their Olympic committees look at it and say, we don't have anybody in the top 100. We're not going to go. Where before they say, you know what? We might train hard. We're going to do whatever we can. We're going to build this team and we're going to take our shot. You just don't see that anymore. And that's the downside for sure.
And I think that's one of the problems with the current qualification system. There was an idea that in order for Taekwondo to stay in the Olympics, it would have to field athletes from 200 countries in different regions. So when you move to a regional-based system of qualification, as opposed to a world-based system of qualification in total, you're quite honestly losing out on, you have the top 6, I believe, that are qualified, then the rest are by region or whatever,
Correct.
wild
Correct.
cards. So now what happens is, if you're not in the top 6, it's a happenstance opportunity perhaps. And so the original idea where the Olympics, when we fought, it was the best of the best, top 16 in the world. It was the best of the best, period. You had to be in the top, you had to qualify, you had to win, and if you won, you got to go, or at least your country got to go. So I think that that's one of the things. I think the other thing I think that you said is correct is it's a almost an apprehension, fear that if you put an athlete in this category and they can't qualify because they're up against number 1, then, or number 4, that why try? Let's put somebody in a category that's a lot easier. So do you think that this will have an effect on the actual Olympic competition itself?
I don't. I do think that the flip side of that, because of the popularity of the sport, like in Africa, of course, it's always been popular in Asia and Europe. Quite honestly, you're getting some pretty quality, athletes in there. Like, for example, I watched the European qualifier in one category and I said, holy cow, those 2 guys that got through, they're dangerous. They just made that category really scary for some of these top people. I don't necessarily feel that in the Pat 2. We have a few quality athletes that I think are going to give people their, run for the money at the Olympics. But generally speaking, we're a little bit further behind than some of the other places in the world. But, I think when it comes to Olympic time, the top 16, at least, in theory, it's a tough tournament, and there's a lot of ways to lose. Look, the Olympics has even more pressure than this last region, but we had 5 out of 8 categories, right? There's 8 categories, 4 men and 4 women. 5 out of the 8 number 1 seeds, gone. First match. 5 number 1 seeds. So kind of contradicting to what we just talked about before, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on those countries or those people individually. And the other 3 were, there was 2 Americans and 1 Brazilian, and those 3 got through. But the other 5, man, they lost. And that's a tough pill to swallow for those countries, that 2 were from Mexico and 3 were from Colombia. And that's just not acceptable, not acceptable at all.
Is that the nature? Do you feel that is the nature of the format, or is it the nature of what you and I would have experienced, which was just game day fear or apprehension or the idea that it's possible that you could lose? So is it the format that's causing those wins or losses?
No, I don't think it's a format. Actually, I think if I'm being really critical, it's programming from those specific countries. If I'm being less critical, I'm like the athletes weren't able to step up to that pressure and do what they were quote unquote supposed to do. And I'm okay, to be honest with you, losing like in the semifinal. That's sport. It happens all the time. But when number 1 seeds go out in the first round, to me, that's just underperforming on the athlete. I don't even know if I could put that on the programming at that point. You know what I'm saying? Because you train your athlete, you give them all the resources, and then they go out and lay an egg in the first match. That's a little tough to swallow. Just being completely honest. But I also think that there's, at the end of the day, I've always taken responsibility. And if we lose, it's my fault. I didn't train them properly. I didn't put them in the right position. I didn't, wasn't able to tap into them psychologically and emotionally. And I point to myself, but I can't speak for those countries specifically, but I mentioned, for example, Mexico. To me, Mexico, there's no reason at this day and age, maybe not years past, but in this day and age, there's no reason why Mexico doesn't get four athletes. Colombia, they were extremely well positioned. They had a controversial match in the semifinal for one athlete, but the other two, they lost early, and there's no excuse for that.
Well, I'm going to talk about the curative for this, but let's just take a short digression for a minute. And who should we be watching from the Pan Am region to do well and potentially be a medal potential at the Olympic Games?
I think let's see. On the female side, there's two athletes in 57, an American and Brazilian. They're both young. They're both talented. I think they're wild cards. They're definitely not favorites. And yeah, I see them having a good tournament, and they could, make an upset if people don't watch out. I think there's a chance. Let's see. On the male side, I feel good about our Brazilian, in minus 80. He was a young kid. He's 19 years old. Actually, maybe just turned 20, but he's beaten some of the top athletes. I just think he's in a situation where, again, he has nothing to lose and everything to gain. And he's that scary guy that nobody wants to see. He's young. He's hungry. He doesn't get overwhelmed by any stretch of the imagination. And he's beaten some pretty top world athletes. The American CJ Nichols is dynamic and aggressive. I personally think that he may have peaked a little too soon, but he's extremely athletic, so he's a danger. The Cuban in the heavyweight division, he was a reigning bronze medalist from the last games. He's been a world champion 2 different times. He's definitely in the mix, for a medal. So there's some other talented ones, but those are the ones that kind of highlight to me that they're dangerous, that I know people are watching out for.
You were part of a legacy from 1988 that I still go back to, because even though I competed in the following games, I would arguably say that the best Olympic Games ever for just pure athleticism and technique, and by far the way the game should be played, was probably 1988. And I think the reason I mention this is going to lead me into the question, is from that particular Olympic Games, without thinking, without flinching, I could give you 1, 2, 3, 4 players that typified, exemplified the beauty of Taekwondo, and they were unique and different. And I'll give you one of my all-time favorites, and we both know him, Jungkook Young, or Jung Young Sam and Park Bong Kwan. When you saw these guys do Taekwondo, that was Taekwondo as it should be done. And you knew when they went to the Olympic Games, they were going to win. And you certainly were up there as well. The reason I ask you that question is, can you tell us who, if you were looking at this coming games, 2024, if it's possible, who should we be watching from any country? Who is going to be that next Jungkook Young with that sort of dynamic ability?
Yeah, first going back to 88, I mean, you mentioned those names, and we're history buffs, but those dudes were special guys. They were special, unique people. I agree with what you're saying. You watched them for 2 minutes and you knew they were different. And there's a lot of fighters that were good. There's a lot of fighters that may be great, but then there's some special ones. There's those unicorns. I think I talked about that on the last podcast. And, moving forward into this generation, I think there's some good fighters. I think there's some great fighters. I don't know that there's any unicorns. I mean, I don't know there's anybody that I go, this guy is just an alien. This female. And for example, there's a flyweight, a 49 female girl. She's She's been number one for 5 years. She won the last Olympic Games. She's a world champion. Her name is Panipak. She is head and shoulders above everybody else. She could be a unicorn just because she's just so much different than everybody else in her category. There's other good ones, but she's different. In the men's side, I would have to say the reigning Olympic gold medalist. He's from Uzbekistan. His name is Rashidov. He came out in the last Olympic Games as like 18 or 19-year-old and just ran the table, beat everybody. And this dude is just unique. Like even now, like you watch him train and you're like, holy cow, how does he do that kind of stuff? He's pretty special. But again, he's in that 68 category where some weird things can happen too. But I like those two as really unique and stand out. They could easily lose because there's other very, very good quality athletes in those categories. But those two to me are just out there on a platform by themselves. They're really, really unique. And when I say unique, they've been able to replicate that, kind of over and over and over. I will say the last guy, he's nowhere near as successful as these two. The Korean minus 80, he's so athletic and he has such a gas tank. I mean, I've never seen anybody say, when they say go, the guy just goes. I mean, he just puts his head down. His head is in the guy's chest and he's trying to kick. The referee's holding him back. And it doesn't matter if he's winning, losing, the guy is just going forward. So he's a different, you look at him and say something's special, something's different about that guy. He's just not good. He's different. He's unique. So those three would stand out in my mind.
Oh, good. I agree with you. I think that's one of the challenges with the format of the sport, or perhaps the nature of the athletes. And I don't want to really delve into that today, but I do want to talk about something that's interesting and seems to be a persistent problem. And I'll speak frankly, it's difficult for me to watch this match format. I do my best to support my friends and my teams, and I'll turn it on and I wake up at whatever time frame it's on, or I'll watch a YouTube live stream, and I get about a minute in, other than wanting to see one of my friends do well. And then I just can't watch it any longer. And that manifests itself into the audience. So when you went to Korea, and it's probably a bad example because it's their national sport, but when you went to a gym to fight in Korea, whether it was a world championship, an open, a Olympics, it was packed and there were tons of people in it. And when we went together to other events like Hong Kong World Championships, it was packed. There were people in the stands. We went to Copenhagen. It was packed.
Yeah.
I watched part of the qualifiers that were on, and it looked like friend and family day at my Taekwondo school, right? It was, you could have thrown a basketball in there and you wouldn't have hit anybody. So is that because of the format of the sport? Is it the competition? What is contributing to this lackluster ability of Taekwondo to generate spectators?
That's such a big question. You're right. Like, I think there's a few countries in the world that you go and there's Taekwondo fans. And I mentioned Mexico. You go to Mexico and you can't buy a seat. You can't get in the place. It's unbelievable how much passion and love they have for that sport over there. So not just Taekwondo people, random people. They just come in. I remember sitting next to somebody, a woman and a dad and a little girl. And I said, who did you come here to see? And they said, Mexico. I'm like, do you know somebody? They're like, no. I'm like, do you practice? What belt is she? No. I'm like, what? They didn't even practice Taekwondo. They were just pure spectators. So it does exist, but it's just a few countries in the world. And I think that I would have to point up to the leadership that maybe they've created so much parity in this sport that it's not as exciting. Maybe they haven't done a good enough job of, again, marketing it so that people will be interested in it. But it's like that here in the United States. I mean, it's a big country with a lot of people that do Taekwondo. And the only ones that are sitting there watching are maybe moms and dads. You watch the Olympic trials and, there's a handful of people. Now, I will say this. Back in the day when I fought and other people fought in Colorado Springs at the Olympic Training Center in the gym, it was packed. From the bottom row to the top row, it was packed. You couldn't hear yourself. So It can happen, but somehow, some way, I think the management of the sport needs to market a little bit more. Maybe make some stars, maybe have some stories, storylines. There's something that has to be done, because I would agree with you. It's not being viewed as much as it should have. And maybe, to your point, maybe it's the casual fan that would just kind of sit there and say, wow, this is pretty exciting. Maybe, not maybe, probably, if they're doing exactly what you said, like, I can't watch this. I can watch it for about a minute and I got to get out of here. I can appreciate the beauty of it, but the average person can't. So that's a problem. If we want our sport to grow, that's a problem. I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, this is a great topic for another podcast, but the idea is, when you're watching a sport, even if you don't understand the sport, it should be something that creates at least an interest in you. And so I love my brothers in other martial arts, but there's certain martial arts I can't watch because I just don't understand it. And you could easily compare this to UFC or jiu-jitsu, right? If you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner, oh my gosh, I got stuck in my mouth. And you watch a traditional jiu-jitsu match, that's hard to watch sometimes, especially when the guys are sitting on the floor grabbing each other's ankles. And I love everybody that does jiu-jitsu. It would be the other martial art I would practice if I could. But America watches UFC. It watches full contact martial arts, and they know the players and they fill the stadiums. I'm doing a podcast with one of our friends, George Bell, and we finished the podcast and he's off to a UFC event, which I didn't know was happening. So there's definitely a way to fill the stands and these other attempts. Is there anything in the works that you know of that could revitalize people's interest at the grassroots level or just a general spectator level?
I think that's a little bit of a loaded question, because if you ask me globally, I would have an answer. If you asked me domestically here in the United States, I would have another answer. I want to dive into something you said, because the difference between jiu-jitsu or judo and stuff like that, that's very an intricate grappling martial art. Taekwondo is a striking martial art. So at the minimum, if you know nothing, you can say these guys are trying to jockey for position or get a submission or whatever. Maybe I understand that, maybe I don't. But on the other side, if something is striking, you expect to see somebody get hit. And when you don't, you don't understand it. You know what I'm saying? So that's the attraction to UFC or boxing, for that matter. Someone's getting hit. And anybody can understand that. And I think when you watch Taekwondo, people are like, why aren't they hitting each other? Why? How was that a point? Well, you know what I'm saying? People can't even understand that. So I think that's, kind of going back over there. But as far as the revitalization, I know there's a big thing right now called combat Taekwondo. They're trying to mix some philosophical martial art ideas, but basing it more on Taekwondo. There's a company that's kind of having minor league, major league, and professionals. I don't know if it'll ever, be a UFC style thing, but they're trying. I like the idea. I like the concept. And there's another gentleman out of California that has a Next TKD. It's basically like an old school Taekwondo, but in a round format, with referees pushing buttons and just kind of getting some people being a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more physical, taking out some of the rules that are allowed currently with holding your leg up, where you can't kick more than once. You got to kick directly to the target. So there are a few companies out there that are trying some things, but it's going to be tough for them to do it. It's going to be tough.
So, I'm going to ask you the big question. And the question is, so you've been an athlete, you've been an administrator, you've served on the board of directors, you ran the coaching program, you were the coach for the United States, high performance director for the United States, and worked with other countries as well. So now I'm going to put you in the next logical position. You're going to be the president of either a regional or the world level organization. And as president, you're going to fix the problem that you experienced in the qualifier. So you're given unlimited resources, unfettered power, which I would argue the current leadership has, and it's in your hands. You have the opportunity to try to correct the course, steer the ship in a better direction. What are your one or two or three things that you do to make our world a better place for our sport?
So, I mean, look, I'm going to bounce around here. Big picture, I change the leaders. I believe everything leadership. I said this last time and I'll say it again. I believe leadership because if the leaders on top have a proper vision, if people in the bottom look to the top and say, I trust, I believe, I'm willing to follow, then we have some really good things. But when the bottom doesn't believe the top, I don't care if it's at the world level, the regional level, domestic level, there's always going to be a disconnect and it'll never get fixed. So first and foremost, if, for me, let me start domestically, because that's what I would do. I'd reverse engineer all this stuff. I would just make sure that I utilize every resource that I have, not pick and choose because it suits me, but what resources are out there that's for the betterment of everybody. That's number one. Number two, if I did that, I believe that people would be more inclined to help, to volunteer, to add their expertise or utilize their resources for the betterment of everybody. I don't think it's that difficult of a job, even in this region, which is a poor region. People forget that the Pan American region is a poor region. Other than Canada, United States, a few other countries, there's a lot of countries that are third world countries or at least underdeveloped in sport. Let's say that. And I would definitely set up regional training centers for those people to go to in a close proximity that they could build their athletic level and coaching level. And for me, I think that would give them a sense of pride, a sense of hope, a sense of mindset of, I can win a Pan Am Championships. I can win a Pan Am Games. I can win a World Championship. I can get to the Olympic Games. But I don't think that's there right now. So for me, I would, I have a little personal domestic model that has been very successful for me. When I look at companies like the UFC, what has transformed the UFC? You could say they have a performance center in Las Vegas. They have a performance center in Beijing. They have a performance center in Mexico. They are going to those parts of the world and they are educating, training, developing people in that area. Just the last UFC fight, you had 2 Chinese athletes fighting each other. You've had 2 or 3 UFC champions from Mexico. We're talking, this has happened in 5 years, 7 years. UFC has transcended regions of the world. So for me, that's what I would do. I would try to set up a South American training center, a Central American training center, a North American training center, and put the biggest, brightest people there and get the other, utilize our resources to be able to enable these other athletes and coaches to come there and learn and develop, take the information back home. And I think it's a recipe for success.
I don't disagree. And I think you've tapped into a model. The IOC created Olympic Solidarity to do exactly that. And the reason there's such great success in sports they have targeted, including track and field and swimming and Taekwondo originally, because it was a sport that athletes could get up to speed, which you mentioned in your last podcast, pretty quickly and go from zero to hero in a number of years as opposed to 10 or 20 years. And so the idea of a regional training center that in part had Olympic Solidarity money, that they have a ridiculous amount of money that's given to the Pan Am regions and was originally overseen by Vasquez from Mexico until he was no longer in charge of it. And then the gentleman I worked with, the Sheikh, was in charge of Solidarity. And they asked me what countries and what benefits. So we went around Asia and created those facilities and opened them up in 45 countries in Asia. And there just hasn't been that effort here. But you mentioned something that I want to kind of talk about without naming names, but it seems that even domestically, we don't have our best and brightest at the helm of the organization. And then when we send them up to the next level, which also doesn't have its best and brightest or sport-specific people at the helm, that's what we're sending. So when you send second and third tier individuals into those organizations and people acquiesce, and then they go to an organization like the World Organization and they're run by, we had a saying at the Olympic Committee and I digress because I promised never to bring my personal opinion, but I was given the best advice I'd ever heard. And it was said, I haven't met a single person who doesn't like a plane ticket and a meal. So, and it seems like we got a lot of people on the plane ticket and meal plan that are involved in these organizations. So how do we get to a place where we do get people with experience and expertise in a region and a country like, we have Canada, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, United States, and probably a handful of other countries that I'm not thinking of in the moment in this region that have a ridiculous amount of GMP, wealth and knowledge and expertise. And in fact, we have so many people going around the world using their expertise to better our sports. So how do we inspire them, Coach, to help us?
I think, I'll go here specifically in this, our domestic country. We're Americans. We live here, even though I work for the Brazilian, Olympic Committee, and, 100% committed to those guys, and they've treated me well. And I think we've built, kind of earlier, I talked about some of the programs. I mean, and I feel very proud that we've been able to do that in about 5-year periods. I started in 2018 with them, and here we are 2024, getting in our 6th year. And we've been able to get 4 Olympians and develop our programs, domestically. Is exactly what I had envisioned. So I'm happy that we've been able to fulfill that. But I think you have to be careful in how you define success. Is success getting a medal at the Olympic Games? Is success having 2 or 3 good quality athletes? Or is that going to happen by itself? In a country like this, I would imagine that you're going to find, 3 or 4 pretty damn good athletes. And you could coach them. I could coach them. Anybody could coach them with a little tweaking, some good support. Or is it defined by that 2nd tier and 3rd tier and how people are coming up? I mean, I'm part of one, and I won't mention names. There's 2 programs right now in the United States that are developmental programs, and they got different names and different offshoots and blah, blah, blah. And it's sad because they shouldn't even exist. The program that I'm helping shouldn't even exist. If we should all be part of the organization. We should be those developmental athletes in the organizations, but that doesn't exist, hasn't existed. Therefore, these other teams and these other groups have had to do it themselves. For me, that's a shame for the parent organization. The parent organization should be fulfilling all those roles and responsibility, and it should all be this one big, giant kumbaya, but it's not. Instead, it's good luck, guys. I hope you're doing it, guys. And then maybe some of those people can get to the top. I just think that's a backwards model. It shouldn't exist. It exists because of the failure of the parent organization, in my opinion. We could debate about it. I mean, I'd love to talk with, different people, but when I look at the health of the organization, it's not there. The wealth of good athletes is probably there. I mean, I'm not going to deny that there's some good kids, in every part of the country, but why? How? Why haven't they been able to have more? I mean, it's like that with the coaches. I mean, there are some really good coaches out there, and I mentioned it last time, that can't even get sniffed at, that have been producing for a long time. And meanwhile, there's people that had never produced and all of a sudden are just on staffs. They're going around sitting in chairs. You could say, well, they're getting their chance, but there's other people that have worked their way up and they should be getting that chance. There's some of these kids in these programs that have worked their way up that should be getting their chance, but they're not. So, I guess it depends on how you're trying to, is the organization successful because they have a few results, or are they successful because they have a very solid pipeline, not by chance, but by development? And I think I mentioned this to you years ago. You and I, and a handful, we're talking old school, you and I and a few other people, we were successful despite the organization, not because of the organization. That was in the Stone Ages. In this modern day and age, with the resources, money, and tradition that this country has in this sport, the programming should be off the hook. The programming we should have 4 athletes. We should have 6, 7, 8 athletes qualifying for the Olympics. We should be going to the World Championships, not hoping that we can win our 2, 3 matches, but every single one of our guys are locked and loaded and scary. I mean, I used that term before, scary. We don't have that now. And that's a problem. In my opinion, that's a problem for here.
And I agree with you. I mean, I'm going to give you two things that I always say, and I don't see it occur in quite frankly in our national organization. I don't see it occur in the world organization, and I can't speak to the Pan Am organization currently. But if this were Friday Night Football, and this were the San Francisco team or the New York team or the Miami team or the Dallas team, and the coach didn't perform or the CEO didn't perform, they'd be fired. And they would be fired because that's performance. Now, that's one thing that I would like to add to that. And we don't have a performance mentality when it comes to our staff, but we do have a performance mentality when it comes to our athletes. I don't believe that performance in a medal sense is indicative of success of an organization. And nor do I believe that non-performance is necessarily unless it's habitual. So we can go back a little ways, and we both know individuals that won medals, but not because of the program. They won it because they were unicorns and they were good at Taekwondo or they performed. Now, they didn't come up through the program. They were handpicked. So if I wanted to go out and just pirate or vampire athletes, I could, and I'd have the best team within a week or a month or a year, and I'd perform. Now, that wasn't because of a program. It's I identified athletes that I thought could perform, and I gave them the opportunity. And when you exclude others and don't give them an opportunity, that's the bigger challenge. So I think, and this is the thing that I'll add only for your consideration, which you said already, I think you're right. I think it's about sustained competitive excellence where an individual gets into the pipeline and can be identified or welcomed. Forget about identifying them. You and I were part of an identification program way back when, and we identified 30, 35 athletes. And out of that group that we identified and gave opportunities to, 20 became national team members and went on to go to Olympic Games. And that's because we took the time to open the doors, open the windows as wide as we could, and let everybody in. And then it was a performance environment. Here's your resources, perform, and you will prosper. So I think that's one of the things that I think would be, I think it's always important to, but I think, Coach, the thing you said was really important, and I think people should hear is medals do not mean an organization is successful. Over a period of time, no medals certainly means an organization is not doing success. But you also know when we competed in any division, it was 3 or 4 deep, and those 3 or 4 could go and medal, including division I was in was probably the least deep over a period of time because I was in it so long. But your division was deep, and lightweight was 6 to 10 deep. So I think that's something to consider. I do have another question for you. So what else can you add from this weekend's events that would be helpful for us to understand as a problem or a solution or something that went well? Anything that you can add from the qualifier?
I mean, I think, listen, I'm always a stickler for organization. I think things should be run on time, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's another step to being, professionalizing our sport, So, at this highest level, I mean, we had some organizational problems where things didn't start on time. They weren't in the right place. We had to go to different venues. And to me, that's just unacceptable when you're getting ready for an Olympic qualification. I mean, this shouldn't be the pinnacle of what we do. And I think that was a little bit of a problem. So I think our region has made some good strides under the current leadership, but we always got to work and we always have to get better. I think that I know you've been very vocal about the electronic scoring systems. I think this one was much better and much more consistently bad, consistently good. It just never stuck out of my head. Like, what's going on? It wasn't a factor. So to me, I'm okay with that. And then the level of refereeing, I'm always going to look for perfection. I'm always going to look for, referees not inserting themselves at certain times. And I would say generally it was good. There were a few that kind of raised there was a few that, you had to like put your ear or your eye up and go, I don't know if I would have called that, So like I said, I think the organization could be a little cleaner. I think the the chess protectors were functioning very well, and maybe KP&P's president and all the people were there making sure that there was no problems. I appreciate that. And then, of course, refereeing is just it's an ongoing quest to professionalize our referees so that we get the right people in the right matches, so that there is a fair judgment as the games are being, played and fought. So, yeah.
Well, I want to let you go. I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm gonna be a little bit of be a little arrogant here and stuff like that. I'm really proud of our Brazil group. We, like I said, we took, a group of people from a while back, and we slowly built them up, and it was a very good team atmosphere. And I think that, it's a shame that some other programs aren't able to do those same similar things, because they definitely have the capability. I think that this next Olympic Games will be exciting, and I'm wishing, everybody the best. And hopefully there'll be a lot of Brazilian supporters out there for us.
Well, we're wishing you the best, and we're wishing Brazil the best for a number of reasons. But, well, one of my favorite reasons is one of my favorite competitors from the old school days, Fabio, was one of my hard fought matches, and he's a good friend and a great competitor. So I know he's hoping for the best, and he must be extremely delighted that you're helping those guys do the best they can. And again, kudos to Brazil for understanding the value of you and your history and your experience, and bringing the best that they can to ensure the best for their athletes moving forward. We're excited to see what you're going to do there, and I'm going to reach out to you for another conversation that we're going to have about everything regarding the future of what we do, how we do it, and what we can do to make it better. But I applaud you for continuing to be in the fight, not exiting it. I think you've realized and understood your value, and you're now in the role of what I refer to as a flame and a torchbearer, where you're carrying the legacy and the knowledge. And then actually, I have one last question before we leave. It's regarding a diminishment that I see prevalent in, at least in the States, with a lack of regard for our brand and what we do and what we represent. And so, that when we competed, we started out as a martial art. We were martial artists. We bowed. We said, yes, sir, no, sir. We wore uniforms, no matter how hot it was on the training floor. We wore everywhere. We did everything. And I'm not saying that's the problem, but I think that we did, and we still did. We had respect for our seniors. We understood we were a martial art, and that's why we started. And what I'm seeing these days on Facebook and TikTok and whatever other formats there are, Instagram, with fingers and cursing, and it's difficult for me to explain that to my young athletes that I'm looking at. They see me as a role model. I go to my gym, I don't curse. I'm who I am. They know how to refer to me, and I can joke around, but I don't curse. I don't do the middle finger. I don't demean other athletes. So I see this becoming slightly more prevalent, and I don't want to put you in a place to comment on it, but if you have anything to say about it,
No, I think, listen, I think we're cut from the same cloth. And, listen, I mean, if you ask me, society-wise, generational-wise, there's definitely been a lack of certain amount of etiquette. And it's funny because, in the old days, when you met a mother or father, it was yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Johnson. You never would call somebody, hey, Pat, what's going on? How's it going today? Can I watch TV? I mean, it just wasn't the proper etiquette to speak that way to anybody that was older than you. Forget about if you had respect for them or not. It just wasn't in society. And that wasn't just here in America. That was in Europe. That was in Asia. And in some countries, they still have certain things that young as brother, habibi, compadre. I mean, it depends where you go in the world. They still have that certain level of respect for their elders. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know sport can diminish that sometimes because people are very self-centered, whether you're on a team or whether you're an individual sport. But I will have your back on this one and go and say that although we are a sport, we're a martial sport. we're a martial sport, and I believe that we should hold ourselves to a higher standard and just show minimal respect. I mean, there's some of my very influential people that I've had in the past, and I dare to say, like, I would never have believed that they would accept anybody coming and saying, "Hey, so and so, hey Herb," like I just, you don't have to call me a master, you don't have to call me, just sir, mister. I mean, something out of a certain amount of respect. Listen, I'm older than a lot of people. I'm 53 years old. I'm not quite your age, but people walk into my school and I know they're 30 years old. Mrs. Johnson, how you doing? Nice to see you. How you doing, ma'am? Sir, it's just a certain amount of respect, as that's a mother of a kid. And I'm trying to show that kid respect to the mother and to the father. And so when I see these kids walking around and not showing the proper just human courtesy, I don't think it's a good thing. Do I think they need to be subservient and walk behind and be afraid? Absolutely not. I'm all for the modernization of sport. But listen, we are a martial sport, and I think that we need to, continue with some of that stuff. With all the athletes, I mean, Terrence Jennings said something so special to me the other day. He said, when I came to you, not only was the training good and the environment good and you mentored me well, but you taught me how to act. You told me, now that you're an Olympian, your life changes. And I taught him how to be an Olympian and things like that. And he said that to me, and that doesn't show up in the record books. Nobody knows about that, but it made me feel very proud as a father, as a coach, as a mentor, that I did something the right way for somebody else. And unfortunately, I think we have a lot of these youngsters out there that don't get that. And again, I got to go to leadership. There's not bad kids, there's bad parents, right? I mean, I know there's some bad apples out there, but I think the people that we know, generally speaking, in the sport, it's bad leadership. Someone didn't sit them down and say, "Hey, I'm not asking you to be a saint. I'm not asking you for perfection, but I am asking you for excellence. I'm asking you to be the best person you can be, because other people are going to see you. And if listen, I can curse with the best of them. You know that privately, but you know what? I'm a public figure, and I have to speak a certain way and act a certain way, dress a certain way. And if I don't do those kind of things, then I'm a less of a person. I truly believe that." And
I agree with you. And I know we share this thought, and I'll tell people they should read a book by Thomas Wolfe, the great author, called The Right Stuff, and it's about the astronauts. And every great culture of elite performers, whether it be astronauts, basketball, football players, they have a culture, they have a esprit de corps on how they treat each other, but more importantly, how they expect others to treat them. We start with the way we treat each other, and then we emulate it and personify it so others can learn how to do it. And so all we can do is lead by example, which I've always appreciated that you've led by example. So we will continue that journey. And I know you're an avid reader, and you read the coach from USC's book, Coach John Wooden, and his just amazing ideas as well. So we'll leave that topic for another day, and just.
I got a question for you, real fast. Just let me. So, what do you think? What do you think about some of our mentors that taught us how to act and conduct ourselves and stuff like that, and now flipping the script and not teaching those people? Do you follow me?
Based on a couple of recent episodes, I reached out to those individuals and sent messages and conversations. And I asked that question. I said, what happened? I remember being on a team with you my first year, and you were my captain, and I had to cook noodles and do laundry and carry stuff and say yes or no, sir, and do practices I didn't agree with people I didn't think were great. And we did all of that, and you expected a certain behavior from me and everybody else. And then when I was team captain, I did that with my teammates, and we carried that. So what is going on? And as they have that emoji, or when you're on your phone, the crickets, that's what I got. I got crickets from one, and then the other one, I got some weird explanation that didn't have anything to do with what I said. It was almost as if I was speaking a foreign language and he didn't hear it. So I can only assume that they they perform, they prefer performance over process. And so I start with process. The way you do what you do is more important than your outcome. Your outcome will come if the way you do what you do is better. And so I hope that's not the case in this situation, because I wish each and every athlete that participates the best. But as you know, arrogance and karma have a funny way of appearing at the last and most ridiculous moment. We had a mutual colleague that we worked with, and a group that was really successful but didn't carry themselves. And so what they tell you, it's an old Korean adage, and it's in other cultures as well: be nice on the rise up the ladder to the people you meet, because those are the same people you're going to meet on the way down. So let's I can't, and you as well, we realize that we can only affect the way that we act. I bow because I have respect for myself. I don't make a determination on you. I bow because of respect for myself. And so I'm going to continue to do that. But I had conversations with those individuals. Apparently it didn't resonate, but they may have been too busy eating or on airplanes.
I think what scares me is, and I know like anytime a coach gets fired or a coach moves on, I mean, they're getting fired because things aren't right. You know what I'm saying? And it's time for a change. It's time for, reigniting the fire. And it happens to all the great coaches, all the great programs. I mean, very few people just can go off into the sunset. But I guess what scares me a little bit about is, how does this influence the culture moving forward when those people leave? That's what scares me. Are we going to have a culture of people that say, hey, John, hey, this, hey, that, walk into your gym with their Taekwondo shoe, with their sneakers on and, their flannel shirts? I don't know, so again, I know we're getting off topic a little bit.
No. It's a great topic, and you're right. So it's going to affect a generation of athletes. And, as you've said before, I have my own issues with the scoring system, because people are forgetting how to do crucial kicks. To be honest, nobody knows how to back kick any longer. And they do the back kick to score a point, which I would probably have done as well.
Yeah.
And they do a back hook kick that the only thing that happens is somebody's feelings get hurt. So, I am still a fan of the dynamic of Taekwondo, both in and out of the arena. So we had a certain culture that was based in respect, because it was necessitated by the fact we were doing Taekwondo. We had a certain physical culture, because we knew that anytime we stepped in the arena, we could be unconscious and or hit in the face. And if we got hit in the face, it wasn't going to be good. It wasn't going to be, you hurt my feelings. It was going to be, I'm going to have to get some dental work done. So I believe we can. I know that in my gym and in the people that I visit and the dojongs I visit, people are still teaching that Taekwondo. They may not be competing at the levels that would necessitate an Olympic berth, but they're still teaching it. So I think there'll be a circle that comes around, both, I want to say, on the respect side, because judo still has it. You can't walk in a judo gym with your shoes on, and you can't walk into a dojo and not bow, and you can't walk in and disrespect an instructor. Be honest, it's still better in Korea at that level. The gyms I visit there, it's still better, and they haven't lost it, at least that I've seen.
You're right.
So I want to say it's an American phenomena, and I think if it's an American problem, it's Americans that have to solve it. So,
all right.
We come from a fighting culture, and I think that's one of the reasons it's good to continue to use your voice, to use your platform, and to use your experience. And every time I do, that's why I do this. This has been an unusual podcast for me, because I've espoused a lot of my own views, but that's because you and I go way too far back not to. So but I think people want to hear it.
I think, you're in the same situation as me. Herb, is because, listen, I work for another country, so it's a little bit, I think it's unethical for me to really dive into any individual program, whether that be in Cuban or Mexican or Canadian or American or Puerto Rico. I mean, I could talk vaguely. If I'm a free citizen, so to speak, and I'm not working for any, national organization, then I think I would speak a little bit more freely. But I mean, I love these conversations because, I think we're, getting some good information out there, and we can, keep keep touching on some of these subjects that need to be touched on. So kudos to
Well,
you.
when you
putting this
become
together.
president of the WT, then just remember me fondly and
I'll
say,
send you a plane
say,
ticket.
Say no, I don't want a plane ticket. I just want to play the kimchi. So or arroz
All
con
right, brother.
gandules. Brother, it's good.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yep.
You. What an amazing podcast. What an amazing individual. I mean, at the cutting edge of his sport, cutting edge of developing programs, and now helping Brazil build one of the best programs in the world, and yielded 4 qualifications, a complete slate for the Paris Games. They must be extremely proud. But my coach and friend, my brother, Juan Moreno, always willing to talk about what needs to be said in a positive way. He brings and shines a light into every room that he enters. So again, on behalf of the Masters Alliance, I am Herb Perez, proud to bring you this podcast. And please share this with your friends so that we can continue to grow our sport, our martial art of Taekwondo.